listening to Nightlight.
Hi there, and a very warm welcome to a special end time edition of Nightlight. And back with me on the show, talking with us over Skype, is Joseph Candel. Welcome back to Nightlight, Joseph.
Thank you for inviting me back. It's a real privilege to be on your show.
End time news and views.
Joe, on previous editions of Nightlight, you've very clearly laid out the roadmap of end-time landmarks that we're to look out for as we journey through the end time. Joe, we did a whole show on the signs of the times that Jesus said in Matthew chapter 24 would give us a clue as when to expect his second coming. But there is one more sign that we didn't cover, right?
Yes, one sign that we didn't cover was in Matthew chapter 24, verses 37 through 39. And Jesus is speaking here, and he says, "But as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. For as in the days that were before the flood, they were eating and drinking, marrying and giving in marriage, until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and knew not until the flood came and took them all away, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be." That's an important point that Jesus was making, that before his second coming, the world would be like the days of Noah before the flood.
Right.
Now, to kind of get an idea what it was like, we have to turn to Genesis chapter 6. And in verse 1 and 2, it says, "And it came to pass, when men began to multiply on the face of the earth, and daughters were born unto them, that the sons of God saw the daughters of men, that they were fair, and they took them wives of all which they chose." Now, these sons of God, these are fallen angels that came down to earth, and they married the daughters of men. And in verse 4, it says, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God," the fallen angels, "came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them, the same became mighty men, which were of old, men of renown." So in the Hebrew translation, it's that the original word is called Nephilim.
Right.
And when it was translated into English, the translators used the word giants. Obviously, they were giants, they were big, but the word Nephilim was the original word in the Hebrew. And of course, this means the fallen ones.
Right.
And then it goes on and says in verse 5, "And God saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually." After we see the fallen angels came down, they made love and took wives to the daughters of man. And you see immediately after this, we see how great man's wickedness had become on earth because of the fallen angels, and of course their offspring, the Nephilim.
Right.
And it goes on to say in verse 7, "And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, and the creeping thing, and the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them." And the last verse we'll read in Genesis 6, it says in verse 11, "The earth also was corrupt before God, and the earth was filled with violence." And this is what we see today. I mean, look at the violence we're seeing, nation fighting against nation, kingdom against kingdom, and crime and shootings. Just the violence is really bad. It increased greatly in this generation. So we see this being fulfilled.
Right. So, Joe, the Bible is very clear in Genesis chapter 6, verses 1 through 4, that there were giants on earth called the Nephilim, and they were the offspring of this renegade band of fallen angels who came down to earth and interbred with human women. And this happened both before and after the flood, and there were many of them. Joe, for about how many years were there giants upon the earth? I mean, for how long in Earth's history was it a normal thing to see a giant?
Okay, we know that, of course, the Lord destroyed the world with the flood, and this happened around 2400 BC, around that time period. It may not be the exact date, but it's very close. And we see the second eruption, it seems to have happened during Abraham's time, and that was around 1800 BC.
Okay.
Because it says, for when he came out from Haran in Genesis 12:6 and entered Canaan, the significant fact is stated that Canaanite was then, that is to say, already in the land. So it's pretty certain that the second eruption took place before Genesis chapter 14. For there, the Rephaim were mixed up with the 5 nations or peoples, which included Sodom and Gomorrah. So it looks like that's when that happened, around 1800 BC, where again, it's recorded that it seems that the Nephilim had come back. Another group of fallen angels had come back to earth, not the same ones that were there the first time, because they all will cover this part later, but they were all locked up in hell. So another group of fallen angels came down again and did this. Now, actually, a more modern translation of this version in Genesis 6:4, it says, the giants were in the earth in those days and even afterwards, when the sons of God came in to the daughters of men, and they bore to them, they were heroes which existed from ancient time, and the men of name. So there again, in that translation, it shows that they came down before the flood in Noah's day and after that too, and made love to the daughters of men. And then we see the Nephilim had made a comeback there.
So the giants were around, Joe, for a couple of thousand years, maybe. I mean, these Nephilim or giants were very much a part of the ancient world then.
Yes, they were. I mean, not only they were before the flood as well as after, because we see when for example, the children of Israel, they were on their way to the promised land. And it says in Numbers 13, verses 31 to 33, it says, but the men that went up with him said, we be not able to go up against the people, for they are stronger than we. And they brought up an evil report of the land which they had searched unto the children of Israel, saying, the land through which we have gone to search it is a land that eateth up the inhabitants thereof, and all the people that we saw in it are men of a great stature. And there we saw the giants, or we could say there we saw the Nephilim, the sons of Anak, which come of the giants, and we were in our own sight as grasshoppers, and so we were in their sight. So you can imagine how big these giants must have been. When they looked at them, they felt like grasshoppers.
Well, yes, exactly. So, Joe, they weren't just speaking figuratively. They were actually comparing their size to the giants. So, in other words, they were very, very big and fierce. And, of course, they were not human beings. They were half human and half fallen angel hybrids.
Exactly.
So, Joe, how were these giants defeated? I mean, how were the Israelites able to defeat these huge things? You would have thought they would have been completely invincible.
Actually, how the Lord got rid of them, they were attacked by hornets to get rid of them so they could pass through on into the promised land.
Right.
So the Lord delivered them from these Nephilim or giants. Mm-hmm. The problem was the children of Israel always had problems with the Nephilim, and a lot of that is their fault, because the Lord told them that these Nephilim should be cut off and driven out and be utterly destroyed. This is mentioned in Deuteronomy 20, verse 17.
Right.
So, and if if we make the connection between this breed and that mentioned in Genesis 6, you can understand, why the Lord had to make sure that these Nephilim were vanished from the land. But the problem was that Israel failed in this, and we know not how many got away to other countries because they did escape the general destruction. And in Joshua 16:10 it says, and they drave not out the Canaanites that dwelt in Gezer, but the Canaanites dwell among the Ephraimites until this day and serve under tribute. Here what happened is that the children of Israel, the Lord commanded them to kill the giants, to kill the Nephilim, to kill their animals, don't have anything to do with them, having nothing left of them, have no connection whatsoever with them. And because they failed to obey the Lord in this, these same powerful Nephilim, being cunningly intelligent, became more advanced actually than the children of Israel.
Wow.
I researched that the Nephilim and their descendants also worshipped their ancestors, the heroes of old, and such worship corrupted all their neighbors, including the Israelites. And we find again in Judges 1:19 and 20, it said, "And the Lord was with Judah, and he drave out the inhabitants of the mountain, but could not drive out the inhabitants of the valley, because they had chariots of iron." So you see that their technology, the Nephilim giants had chariots of iron, which the children of Israel did not have. And in verse 20 it says, "And they gave Hebron unto Caleb, as Moses said, and he expelled thence the 3 sons of Anak, who were Nephilim." So and it said, "And it came to pass when Israel was strong, that they put the Canaanites to tribute and did not utterly drive them out." This is in Judge 128. See, so they, what they did is they had the Canaanites pay them money, and they allowed them to stay. And in Judges 2:2 it says, "And ye shall make no league with the inhabitants of this land. Ye shall throw down their altars, but ye have not obeyed my voice. Why have ye done this?" And in verse 3 it says, "Wherefore I also said, I will not drive them out from before you, but they shall be as a thorns in your sides, and their gods shall be a snare unto you." And so we see what had happened to Israel because they didn't obey the Lord and get rid of the giants or the Nephilim, that they eventually worshiped their gods. And of course, much later on, they were destroyed by Babylon. And one of the reasons is because the Israelites were worshiping other gods, the gods of the Nephilim. So this ended up becoming their downfall.
Inspiring you to dig deeper into God's Word. You're listening to Nightlight.
Joseph, we're talking about the Nephilim hybrids who were the result of the illicit interbreeding between fallen angels and human women. And these giants were around for a couple of thousand years, and so were very much a part of the ancient world. And of course, we read about them in the Old Testament in a number of different places. There was the Rephaim, the Zamimim, the Emim, the Anakim, and the Amorites. They were all tribes of Nephilim giants, and they were around all the way up to the time of David, who fought with Goliath, who, along with his brothers, are named as being the last of the giants. And the Bible also talks of them as having 6 fingers on each hand and 6 toes on each foot. So, Joe, for sure, they were not genetically human.
That's a very good point. And before we cover that, I wanted to just give more information on what it was like before the flood, what the fallen angels were doing, what they taught the people, and why it became so corrupt and violent. Then this will lead in to Genesis 3:15 and God's promise of salvation. I'd like to give a little review of what it was like, because Genesis 6, although it does talk a bit about the days of Noah and a little bit about before the flood, but it doesn't go into so much detail other than they were corrupt, the earth was filled with violence, but it doesn't give a detailed description of what it was really like in the days of Noah, which is also very important for the end time, because what it was like in the days of Noah, it is going to be like this again before Jesus' second coming. So let's take a little bit more of a look at the fallen angels and the Nephilim and what they taught the people of the world. Okay? Now, we find this information out in a book called the Book of Enoch.
Right.
And we see in Jude 1:14 that Jude is quoting from the Book of Enoch, and he says, "Now Enoch, the 7th from Adam, prophesied about these men also, saying, Behold, the Lord comes with 10,000 of his saints." So here, Jude, the point here is that he's quoting from the Book of Enoch. So we first learn of Enoch in Genesis chapter 5 about his birth, and his father was named Jared. This was in Genesis 5:18. And in Genesis 5:23, it says, "And all the days of Enoch were 365 years, which was before the flood." But then it says in Genesis 5:24, it says, "And Enoch walked with God, and he was not, for God took him." And of course, we see the same quote pretty much also from Paul in Hebrews 11:5. "By faith Enoch was translated that he should not see death." So Enoch was alive and around when the fallen angels came down, and he wrote all about the fallen angels, and he wrote all about the Nephilim. The Book of Enoch, it's been reported that it came over with the ark. In other words, Noah brought the Book of Enoch with him because God took him before the flood happened.
Wow. So this would make the Book of Enoch the oldest book in the world if it was written in the pre-flood era, and Noah brought it with him on the ark.
Exactly.
Shining bright through the dark night, you're listening to Nightlight.
Joe, let's just talk about what the devil is up to in all this. I mean, was this just a result of fallen angels lusting after beautiful human women and they just couldn't constrain themselves from having sex with them? Or was this a result of some bigger plan that the devil had in mind? And does it have anything to do with what the Lord said in Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, that he would put enmity between the seed of the serpent and the seed of the woman?
Well, you see, Adam and Eve, first of all, they were deceived by the serpent in the Garden of Eden. And of course, they sinned. And of course, the Lord had to move them out of the Garden of Eden. But Jesus had a plan already. He wanted to salvage mankind. He wanted to give them salvation and restoration. So if you look at Genesis chapter 3, verse 15, it says, "And I will put enmity between thee," which is Satan, "and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel." So Jesus Christ was the seed of the woman. And it sounds like many Bible scholars believe that the Antichrist will be the seed of the serpent.
Right.
So what the devil was trying to do by using these 200 fallen angels was that he wanted to corrupt the DNA. See, he wanted to cut off the birth line of the coming Messiah as prophesied in Genesis 3:15.
Right.
Because that in Genesis 3:15 that there would be a Savior would be born from the seed of the woman, and that Messiah Jesus Christ would destroy the fallen angels' power and also give a plan of salvation for mankind because of their sins. So therefore, Satan's followers, therefore they intermingled with the human race and the beast and the insects, and their goal was to mess up the DNA in a conspiracy to stop the birth of Christ. So that was their plan, to try to stop Jesus from being born and becoming the Savior of the world.
Right.
It says that, but Noah found grace in the eyes of the Lord. So obviously Noah and his wife and their seed had not been interfered with.
The light is always on with Nightlight.
You know, Joe, another ancient book that's mentioned in the Old Testament by both Joshua and Samuel is the book of Jasher, which also speaks about these fallen angels and tells how the Nephilim taught and promoted genetic experimentation of the worst kind. This is Jasher chapter 4, verse 18. It says, "And their judges and rulers, the Nephilim, went to the daughters of men and took their wives by force from their husbands according to their choice. And the sons of men in those days took from the cattle of the earth, the beasts of the field, and the fowls of the air, and taught the mixture of animals of one species with the other, in order therewith to provoke the Lord. And God saw the whole earth, and it was corrupt, for all flesh had corrupted its ways upon the earth, all man and all animals." So there you read it in Jasher, and it says that their motivation was to provoke the Lord. It was pure rebellion against God. And it was not just the giants who were the result of genetic tampering, but Jasher says they were mixing all kinds of animals with people. And you know, Joe, when you look at the gods that the ancient civilizations worshipped, like the Babylonians and the Egyptians, they worshipped all kinds of hybrid creatures. The Babylonians worshipped Oannes, who was a fish man. The Egyptians worshipped all kinds of gods with human bodies and animal heads, or animal bodies with human heads, like the Egyptian Sphinx. And maybe, Joe, these weren't purely mythological creatures, but actually the result of perverse genetic tampering by Satan and his fallen angels, who taught mankind to worship these creatures as gods.
That is really correct. You really hit it. And that's exactly what happened. With that information, Jesus is warning us in the end time, and this warning is for now, that as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. And what we had gone over is this is what's coming back again, and it has already started. Scientists are again trying to mix animal and human genes.
Yes.
You know, the scientific community is rapidly making advances in the area of genetics with blending and mixing of species.
Right.
And this is something that so displeased the Lord so much it resulted in the flood. So Satan hasn't given up yet, and he's still trying to conquer the earth by the same means as he used before the flood and also after the flood.
Well, it seems, Joe, that Satan again is up to his old tricks as scientists today are experimenting with human and animal DNA, creating strange animal hybrids in the laboratory and tinkering with mankind's DNA code, trying to so-called improve human beings through transgenics and bioengineering, trying to improve mankind into being something more than how God created them. But God created human beings in his own image precisely the way that he wanted them to be. So to try to improve on the Lord's creation is blasphemy, isn't it? I mean, it's an affront to God. This was why God had to wipe out mankind and every living creature except for Noah and his family, who were found perfect in their generations. Doesn't mean they were perfectly good people. It means their DNA was still intact. And of course, this happened again after the flood. The devil tried the same thing over again. You know, Joe, the story of Noah comes very early in the book of Genesis, so it's easy not to realize that there was 1,500 years since creation until the time of Noah, and the world population could have been quite considerable by then. You know, they're making new discoveries all the time of evidence of the existence of advanced civilizations who built incredible structures and pyramids with precise mathematical alignments to the stars and all kinds of things that defy explanation. But if these were Nephilim civilizations, built by giant races with superior demonic intelligence, who were then completely wiped out at the time of the flood, well, that would make sense. Is that correct?
It's very possible. Of course, the flood pretty much destroyed everything on earth. I would imagine that they probably built it up pretty good. In fact, I just read the other day, and of course, we can't verify if this is true or not.
Right.
Some scientists are now saying that they believe that before the flood, they had the same number of people as we do now.
Wow.
Now, whether that's true or not, I don't know. One thing that really proves, though, the fallen angels and the Nephilim is that after the flood, there were great civilizations. They all have drawings and information that they were visited by gods.
Right.
Who came and taught them, the solar system. They taught them, many, many things scientific, even how longitude and latitude, there's evidence of that they learned after the flood. And of course, you have Atlantis, for example. Now, Atlantis in the Atlantic was supposed to be an advanced civilization. Some people think that maybe it was destroyed in the flood, but I think the majority in this case believe that Atlantis sunk into the ocean. It says in Genesis 10:25, it says, "And unto Eber were born two sons. The name of one was Peleg, for in his days was the earth divided."
Right.
So a lot of Bible scholars believe, for example, that when the earth was all interconnected, like you see South America, you can see it fits right into Africa.
Yeah.
And so at one time, the earth was all, the land was all put together, but then in the days of Peleg, it says the earth was divided, and many scholars believe that the great Atlantis, for example, went into the ocean, the Atlantic there, and now they're finding artifacts and different things to prove that Atlantis did exist. But the point you're making is right on, because yes, even when they came back, other fallen angels, probably not as many as the 200, but they came back and started the process all over again, and great civilizations were built. I mean, look at Egypt, who was considered the first world empire. Look at their pyramids. Mankind today, scientists, and they do not know how those pyramids were built
Wow.
in the time of Egypt, the first empire. So obviously, as you were saying, they had techniques, and these fallen angels and angels were, like I said before, they were respected by the people of the earth. They thought they were gods. They had magical powers, and Satan, using the fallen angels and the Nephilim, used this power to really deceive the people of the world. And we're probably going to see a repeat performance in the time of the end. And we're seeing now the splicing is going on, and this kind of scientific DNA situation is continuing to make progress,
Right, and they've now mapped out the entire human DNA genome. And Joe, they've been able to digitalize biology basically by converting the 4 elements of DNA into computer language. So they can now alter DNA quite easily or graft in DNA from other species to try to enhance human beings in all kinds of ways. I mean, there are many different scientific fields that are now converging: IT technology, robotics, nanotechnology, biometrics, trying to produce a so-called superior human being or intelligence that would not even be human. And that's what convinces me, Joe, that we are truly living in the days before the second coming of Jesus Christ, because I know that just as he did in the days of Noah, God will not allow this to go on. He will not allow the beauty, the purity of humankind made in his own image to be corrupted and tampered with by the devil, as he's trying to do today. He's got to and will stop it.
Signs of the times.
People ask, okay, well, what happened to the 200 angels that came down before the flood? If we look at Jude 1:6 and 2 Peter 2:4, it tells us that, and the angels which kept not their first estate, but left their own habitation, he hath reserved in everlasting chains under darkness into the judgment of the great day. And 2 Peter 2:4 says, for if God spared not the angels that sinned, but cast them down to hell and delivered them unto chains of darkness to be reserved unto judgment. So many Bible scholars believe that these 200 angels are in hell, not the lake of fire, but they're locked up in darkness in hell, waiting probably for the great white throne judgment that will take place after the millennium, after the battle of Gog and Magog. So these angels were locked up, and then so what happened to the Nephilim? What happened to the giants before the flood? Many Bible scholars suggest this theory that since the giants were half human and they were half celestial, that when the flood came, of course, their half human body, their bodies died, their physical bodies perished in the flood. So their celestial, their half angel was still alive, and they suggest, Bible scholars, that they became demons that had no bodies. And that's what the theory is, or the suggested idea was, that's what happened to the giants. They became demons because they lost their human body.
Signs of the times.
Been talking about how during the days of Noah and also after that the Earth's population included giants, also known as Nephilim, who were the result of the sinful interbreeding of fallen angels with human women. So do you think, Joe, that means that Jesus was warning that in the last days these fallen angels are going to return to Earth? Is the devil going to send them back again? And if so, how are they going to come?
Well, it appears that this could very likely be the case. Since Jesus said, as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. Could this happen again in the time of the end? Well, I would say there's a very good possibility that this will happen. Mm-hmm. Also, Jesus said in Matthew 24:24, he said, for there shall arise false Christs and false prophets, and shall show great signs and wonders, insomuch that, if it were possible, they shall deceive the very elect.
Right.
And Jesus also said in Luke 21, chapter 21, verse 11, and great earthquakes shall be in different places, and famines, and pestilences, and fearful sights, and great signs shall there be from heaven.
Wow.
And Paul in 2 Thessalonians 2:9, he says, even him, the Antichrist, whose coming is after the working of Satan with all power and signs and lying wonders. So here, this sets the stage. So there sounds like there's going to be some heavy signs and lying wonders that are going to happen in the time of the end.
Right.
And it doesn't go into, even Jesus, they don't go into so much detail. Well, what are these great signs and what are these lying wonders? So a lot of Bible scholars have done a lot of research on what we covered in the fallen angels. And a lot of Bible scholars believe that the possibility that these fallen angels will indeed come back to earth. Of course, in the spiritual realm, they come and go. They can be here, and of course, we don't necessarily see them. Of course, some people, have seen bad spirits and stuff. But the thing is that they could come back. Now, this theory that I'm going to share with you, and I know you're aware of it as well, is called the coming great deception.
Right.
The idea of this great deception is that these fallen angels could come back to earth pretending to be aliens. They would do the same thing as they did before the flood and after, with their same plan to mix people with the DNA with the animals. And Bible scholars believe that the great deception is that the possibility the Antichrist could be a Nephilim, half celestial, half human, and he may come to power with the help of the fallen angels masquerading as aliens and appearing in UFOs, or what is also called flying saucers.
Right.
So the Antichrist could possibly be presented to the world by a supposedly benign alien life force that will suddenly appear on the scene to present him as the savior of mankind. And some Bible scholars they take this a step further by suggesting that this great end-time deception that would include these fallen angels pretending to be aliens will even say they created mankind and that the Bible is a fairy tale, that there's no God and there's no Jesus. Jesus doesn't exist. And this could be talking about the great falling away from faith, as Paul brought out in 2 Thessalonians 2:3, when he was asked about the coming of the Lord and Jesus' second coming in the rapture. He said in verse 3, "Let no man deceive you by any means, for that day shall not come, except there come a falling away first, and that man of sin be revealed, the son of perdition." So these fallen angels, along with the Antichrist, could be doing, signs and wonders to try and to deceive the people. So could you imagine if UFOs came down to Earth and they came out and said, "We're from another planet like Earth, and by the way, we created you, and we're your gods, and we're here to save you from destroying yourself in a nuclear war."
Wow.
And can you imagine how people's faith, even Christians, how their faith would be tested?
Absolutely.
For example, Christians that believe in a pre-trib rapture, if an event like this were to happen, they could completely lose their faith when they see these fallen angels masquerading as aliens do these wonders and signs and said, "Hey, we created you. We're your gods." And if they're not founded in the Word and they believe in the pre-trib doctrine, for example, they can completely fall away from the faith through this coming great deception. And even people who are not Christian, an event like this, a lying wonder like this, could definitely have people would believe in this great deception and follow the Antichrist and say, yes, he's got the answers. And of course, the Antichrist possibly being the Nephilim, he's possibly, doing all the things it says in the Bible. He's restoring, he's sharing the wealth. They have new technology that we don't have. Maybe they have, energy that we haven't seen yet that could be used. They have maybe a way to fight different diseases that are not being cured today. So they're going to have all this stuff that's going to look good to the people of the world. But it is a deception because these are not, quote, really aliens, but they're fallen angels who've come back to once again to deceive the world. And what is their goal with this? To put the Antichrist into power. And of course, eventually he'll be possessed by the devil and say that he is God. So that is their agenda. And they could possibly use this great deception to deceive the world.
Nightlight, keeping you in tune with the times.
Yes, keeping you in tune with the times with the help of Joseph Candel. And we're talking about aliens. And look, when we say aliens, we mean fallen angels. Now, there's been many thousands of sightings of UFOs over the years. You can just go on the internet and you can find any number of pictures or videos of UFOs that defy any kind of scientific explanation. And more scientists are coming out in the open, as well as military people who've been involved in UFO cover-ups. They're now publicly admitting that there are UFOs, and many of them believe that these UFOs are not traveling enormous distances to visit us from some faraway planet. They believe that these are transdimensional craft, and that's proven by the speeds they're capable of and the sudden right-angle turns they can make at incredibly high speeds, and the way they can suddenly appear and then disappear. This all shows that they're not subject to normal earthly physical laws, and that they're crossing into our dimension from a spiritual one. So these are transdimensional craft, and the so-called aliens are transdimensional creatures. And if we look in the Bible, we can see a number of examples where angels, good angels, had the ability to come through from the spiritual dimension and materialize in our earthly dimension.
Exactly.
I mean, the angel that fought with Jacob is a good example, and I'm sure you can think of a number of others, like the angels that went with Lot to Sodom and the angel that visited Gideon. And there's a number of different examples of where angels can take on a physical form, which the theologians called a theophany. And so we need to realize that angels do have the ability to cross through from the spiritual dimension to our earthly dimension, and the fallen angels apparently have the same capability, although it seems they're not able to take on a human theophany in the image of God, but rather they appear in a degenerate form like you see in these pictures of small grey aliens with big black saucer eyes, or various kinds of reptilian aliens. So, Joe, people need to realize that these are not aliens from some distant planet, as they're trying to deceive mankind into believing, but these are nothing more than the fallen angels and demons materializing from the spiritual dimension in a modern materialistic disguise. Is that correct, Joseph?
Well, yes. We have to remember, like what you said about God's angels, yes, they can materialize, dematerialize, when they visited Lot, they even ate with them. So, yes, they can do pretty much everything, mankind does. Of course, they have more power. But don't forget, there is a difference now between the fallen angels and, let's say, demons or unclean spirits. There's a big difference between them. For example, the fallen angels, remember, when they came down before the flood, what did they do? They got the daughters of men. They saw that they were beautiful. Of course, there was a plan in this, but they were able to physically make love with them.
So they took on physical bodies.
Well, they had physical bodies, yes. Just like the angels of God, they have some sort of physical bodies too, where they can eat, drink, and do practically everything a human can do. So the fallen angels, they were able to physically manifest themselves in our plane of existence, visibly here on earth.
So they took on physical bodies, and it seems likely, Joe, doesn't it, that this is what the fallen angels are going to do again in these last days when they appear in our dimension masquerading as so-called aliens.
Yeah, well, the thing is, in Revelations chapter 12, verses 7 through 9, let me read this, because it does say that the devil and all the fallen angels are going to be cast out, probably right at the middle of the 7-year reign. It says here that in verse 7, and there was war in heaven, Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels. And verse 8 says, and prevailed not, neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon, the devil, was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So look at that. It says that which deceiveth the whole world, and maybe he'll do this through this great deception we've been talking about.
Right.
And verse 12 in the same chapter says, therefore rejoice, ye heavens, and ye that dwell in them. Woe to the inhabitants of the earth and of the sea, for the devil is come down unto you, having great wrath, because he knoweth he hath but a short time. So, I used to think, okay, when I read that verse, it's saying they're definitely going to be cast out of heaven eventually. Now, this here is talking about halfway through the Antichrist 7-year reign.
Right.
But they can also, appear earlier, coming into this dimension and go back and forth through the spiritual and the physical. But during this particular event in Revelations 12, they're stuck down here on the earth. Now, I used to think that when the devil and these fallen angels were cast down, that they would, inhabit people. They would come in and just take over, just go into their bodies. But with the fallen angels, they're invisible spiritual beings. They're not entering bodies of humans by possession.
Right.
Because if we consider the fact that the angels, as well as the fallen angels, they do have some sort of supernatural bodies. Mm-hmm. So my idea in researching this and praying and thinking about it, my idea has changed in the sense that there is a possibility when these angels are cast down that they will have their own supernatural bodies, just like the fallen angels did during the flood.
Wow.
Remember what Jesus says, as the days of Noah were, so shall also the coming of the Son of Man be. So the fallen angels do have some sort of supernatural bodies. Now, having said that, on the other hand, the encounter with demons, or what is known as unclean spirits or familiar spirits or devils, they do not have their own bodies.
Right.
So this is why they have to seek a place to dwell and live in, as in possession. Right? You remember, look at the point where when the Legion, he was full of devils, right?
Yeah.
So Jesus was going to cast them out, and the demons told him, please send us into the swine and into the pigs. So they had to go into something. Mm-hmm. And so they went into the swine, and of course they ran and fell over the cliff into the water, into the ocean, and died, the pigs. So the demons, they may well be the disembodied, like I mentioned before, the spirits of the giants that existed in the days of Noah before the flood.
Right.
So, but the fallen angels will have bodies, so that we may see them walking amongst them when they're cast out of heaven.
Whoa.
So that's just something to contemplate. Now, having said that, it's something we'll have to wait and see. But I think this has a very strong evidence that it happened before the flood. And if Jesus said it's going to happen again before his second coming, so it looks like we may actually see these, fallen angels there. Now, but it sounds like the devil himself, it seems that, it says that the devil gave the Antichrist his power and deceit and great authority. So this is in Revelations 13:2. So we may see these, if we're still here during the tribulation, we may see these fallen angels walking around.
Wow.
And of course, the familiar spirits and devils will, also be, like they are today, possessing people.
Right.
Because they don't have no bodies of their own.
Nightlight's interview of the week.
And our interview was with Joseph Candel. And it may surprise you to know that I actually recorded that interview way back in 2012. And I'm sure you're well aware of how genetics and biometrics, artificial intelligence, every field of technology has advanced incredibly since then, as Satan, knowing that his time is short, has intensified his all-out war on humanity and God's creation. Whether the future will unfold in the way that Joseph was suggesting that it might, well, only the future will tell. But the great deception of a so-called alien invasion is a possibility that we should be aware of. So, should Bible prophecy be fulfilled in this way, we will not be deceived. Whatever happens, God's promises of power, protection, and provision for his children are steadfast and sure. This is Chris Glynn signing out, and I'll be back very soon with another Nightlight podcast. Bye for now.